Hi everyone, I'm Elisha Krauss, and this week on the Washington Examiner Newsmaker series, I'm excited to welcome Congresswoman from Texas, Beth Van Duyne. We're going to talk about the Equal Rights Amendment and why it's not good for women, the Ninth Circuit's overreaching hold on the Second Amendment, and the Biden crisis with immigrants at the border. Congresswoman, thank you for making time to join us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I appreciate that. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Absolutely. One of the things that you've been addressing recently in the media is the Biden and Harris, lack of concern about the immigration crisis at the border. Can you talk about that, please?
Well, I think it's lack of concern. I think they're being very glib about it. And I think lack of seriousness. And I think actually probably lack of education about what's actually going down there. I've been down to the border. I'm going to be going again next week. It's going to be my 7th trip down to the border. Seeing the conditions that these kids are being forced to live in. First time that I went down there was in 2014 under the Obama administration. And what I'm seeing is a return, to kids in cages. I'm seeing a return of mass amounts of people that are coming over the border as a direct invitation from the Biden administration. Getting rid of the 100-day or putting the 100-day deportation moratorium in place, inviting people to come in is the exact opposite thing that we should be doing right now. And when you start talking to the people who are on the ground, they will tell you they have never seen these kinds of numbers coming over the border. It is the worst that they have ever seen in our history. And now we are forced in a crisis mode to try to figure out how to handle it. And I was at the Kay Bailey Hutchinson Center on last Monday, and we saw firsthand what these kids are going through. 2,300 cots in one big, huge room. And quite honestly, it looked more like a prison. That the people who are working there are doing their best to handle the situation. But what they kept telling us, they used the word crisis, and they said it's an emergency situation that we're in. We should never have to put these kids in the situation that we are. We're trying to handle it the best that we can, but it has to stop. And we keep feeding it, but we're not actually solving the problem, which I think you saw under the Trump administration by reuniting kids in Mexico with their families, having them apply for asylum in the first safe country they came in, but keeping that family unit intact. You saw that the numbers that we had coming to the border decreased, that the border was secure, and now what you're seeing is massive amounts of unaccompanied minors coming in, taking the trek through Mexico, very dangerous. And the people who are benefiting the most are the human smugglers. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's what we're feeding right now with the current Biden administration policies.
That feeds into my next question. And, my husband and I have frequently volunteered and donated to anti-sex trafficking charities. And I'm sure that you understand this, that those human smugglers that you mentioned also tend to smuggle in drugs, humans, and illegal weapons. And there seems to be a narrative. You seem pretty compassionate and emotional, rightfully so, about these abandoned children at our border that are living in warehouses in plastic and on cots. It's heartbreaking as a parent and an American to hear that anyone would be coming to this country and living in those conditions. But how come you think the narrative tends to be Democrats care, Republicans don't when it comes to the border crisis and children at the border?
I think because what we call it is it's a misnomer. I look at some of the bills that we pass, and what they call it is not what it is. Biden, yesterday during his when he had his press conference earlier this week, kept talking about at the border. This happens, it's cyclical, we see this every year, failing to mention that it has grown by 350% over what it was this time last year. We had 30,000, we now have over 100,000. That is as a direct result. They just don't want to take responsibility for what their policies are, the consequences of their policies. And they talk, but what they talk about is not reality. And unfortunately, you've got a lot of folks in the media who will repeat their talking points without actually investigating the facts behind it and reporting on those facts.
So I want to move out here to the West Coast, or as many of you guys in the middle of the country refer to us as the Left Coast, which might be an appropriate name this week, considering the Ninth Circuit has decided to toss the Second Amendment out the door and said, and it's a law that many people on the left are praising because they think it's going to switch regulations on conceal and carry and open carry in places like my home state of Oklahoma. You are south of the Red River in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. What are your thoughts on the Ninth Circuit's decision, and what do you think the Supreme Court will end up deciding with this?
Well, I think, again, you're seeing far left progressive judges and courts overreaching, basically trying to say that, well, as a state, we don't have to abide by the Constitution. We don't have to recognize constitutional rights. It's my belief that the Second Amendment will hold through, that the Supreme Court will overrule that decision. It's the court that made that ruling has been overruled so many times. It's pathetic, but they keep, coming out with these progressive, ridiculous, unconstitutional rules. And, look, I am a single mom. I do have my license to carry. And I'll tell you, when we talk about women's rights, I want the right to choose. I want the right to choose to how to protect my family. And, for you to say that I'm not able to do that, I think when we talk about women's issues and women's rights, that to me is the great equalizer is me being able to protect myself, and to take that away from me is the exact opposite of helping a woman and empowering women.
I do want to discuss equal rights with you in just a moment, specifically the Equal Rights Amendment debate that's been occurring on Capitol Hill and in mainstream media. But first, I do need to touch on all of the Californians, the leftist Californians that seem to be fleeing to places like your pretty red state. Are you concerned about your constituency shifting more to the left in the next election cycle?
Well, what I have seen, we have a lot of folks, as you mentioned, coming in from California. We are one of the fastest growing states. North Texas is one of the fastest growing communities in the country. Am I worried about it? A little bit. We're like, we want to have you here. We love the opportunities that you're bringing. Our real estate market is jumping and bumping right now. But the same token, realize the reasons why you left your states. You're coming here because your kids aren't able to go to school. You're coming here because your small businesses are closing. You're coming here because the outrageous regulations that are increasing the cost that you pay so that you can't even afford to live there anymore. Recognize that. But we welcome anybody, who is willing to kind of fight for our rights, recognize, individual liberties and freedoms, and, come to Texas. We've got a wonderful, wonderful state.
So circling back to equal rights, I think we can say as conservative women, we are definitely pro equality of opportunity for all. And unfortunately, in America's history, there has been a past in which minority groups and women specifically were kind of kept under the heel of those in authority and didn't have as much opportunity as, thank God, we have now today. But there is a lot of issues within this Equal Rights Amendment. Could you just explain to the audience maybe your top three?
I would say one is it seems to be taking the whole idea of the Equal Rights Amendment, what we're talking about earlier, as a misnomer. It's basically kind of erasing women from existence. Mm-hmm. We already have those rights in place that have been affirmed by the 14th Amendment. Those rights that were originally provided in the 14th Amendment are completely redundant in the ERA. What I find from this is, one, it actually hurts women's rights. It's an attack on women's issues. Number two, it's strengthening groups like Planned Parenthood, which gives them the ability now to sue states claiming that abortion is a right. And number three is it takes issues out of the state's power and puts it all into federal government. And look, I am very much a believer in states' rights. I think they're closer to the people than anybody in D.C., and we need to make sure that they maintain those rights and stop sending everything way east to people in D.C. who don't even know those areas. They haven't visited them. They don't know what's going on the streets in Irving, Texas. And quite honestly, you've got elected officials here who've been elected by the people closest to them, and those are the ones who should be making the decisions. And by the way, it's also a constitutional issue. That's what's guaranteed in the Constitution. And this continual overreach that we see has got to stop.
So speaking of those states' rights, a woman who had been discussed as a potential darling for 2024 GOP presidential candidate, Governor Kristi Noem, has been under fire in recent days because of her decision on an issue that kind of ties in with the Equal Rights Amendments of making sure that girls' sports say girls' sports and boys' sports stay boys' sports. And she said her issue was looking at the local level and looking at how important college basketball is to her state, that it was an economic decision, not just a social conservative one. What are your thoughts on that recent debate?
I think as elected officials, you have to listen to your constituents. It's one of the reasons why, I go out, and as much as I'm in the district, I'm having roundtables, bringing people, listening to them, because I've always said I have to represent the people in District 24 in D.C., not represent D.C. in District 24. But I think, I've also helped co-sponsor a bill with a number of my other Republican colleagues, including a number of GOP women, who recognize that women have an ability to be able to be athletes, but we also have to be on a competitive, fair playing field, which is why I support having women be able to be women. And we are different physically. We have to recognize that. And, having options like or opportunities like athletic scholarships being taken away, I think will set women far back.
So I tend to ask a lot of my female guests this question because when I speak to college campuses and high school students, I often get asked by young women who, have a dream to pursue politics or media and a career, but also want marriage and a family. Can you do both? What would your answer be to young women today who ask you that question?
I'd say you do what's important. Those are the things that you make time for. And family is absolutely, I remember when I first ran for city council, I'm on the phone, I'm nursing, I'm changing diapers, trying to go to as many meetings as possible, but you fit in what's important to you. And I think too many women talk themselves out of running because they are taking care of other people, and they have to recognize that, young women, young girls want to be inspired. They want to see people who have taken those risks and who have succeeded, who are making decisions for them long term. And so I would say go for it. Do it. Recognize that you got to take care of yourself. Prioritize your family. But we want to have a seat at the table making decisions that aren't going to affect our families, that are going to affect us. And unless we run for office, we're never going to have that opportunity.
So final question to you then is, do you see the Republican Party able to make strides with female voters in the coming election?
I do. I think, when it comes to empowering women, when it comes to putting women in strong positions, look at what's happened this last election cycle. A historic number of strong, experienced, very vocal, great experience levels, diverse experience levels have been brought into Congress. And you're going to see these women accomplish phenomenal things. I'm very honored to be part of that class.
All right, Congresswoman, thank you for joining us, and we'd love to have you back again sometime soon.
I'd love it. Take care. Thank you.